Hi, and thanks for dropping by. I've been muddling through a couple of topics that I've wanted to investigate and share with you, and I think I found the right premise to begin. And it's called It Takes a Village. I want to take a different perspective to this old topic and throw in some historical events and that changed us from a cooperative village or community to a society that fosters the individual advancements and not the community. And I say this to you because it used to be different. Let's begin with the early 20th century. We in the United States were changing from an agricultural-based economy to a burgeoning industrial nation. The intercession of two world wars had a major effect both on the economic basis of our society as well as the basic roots of the family, and especially the extended family. As we can tell from the structure of early homes, they were big and housed multi-generations under one roof, whereas today our homes have gone from single-family, basic 3 bedrooms to now tiny houses. Let's look historically what may have motivated our society to move from the large homes in the farms to the small and then to tiny homes, and postulate how that movement changed our social framework and eventually to redefine the family. What opened my eyes to this gradual transitions that are often so slow over time that we don't even see the changes happening, well, that was an event a couple of years ago when a survival group that I belonged to was laying the foundation of how to develop a strategy that would promote the survival of the species should an extinction level event happen. Of course, the primary group that would ensure the survival of mankind would be the men and especially the women who are of childbearing age. Then it was suggested that the older population could be excluded from the group because they couldn't assure the survival of the species. Wow, how wrong were they? Did that ever boil my blood? Then I remember hearing stories about Native American elders who would go off into the woods when they felt they were a burden to the tribe. Now that confused me. So on one hand, I understand the necessity of selective process within a group of limited size. But on the other hand, I started listing in my mind all the reasons that the old folks might help the survival of the species. Okay, so then I wrote a little story about life growing up both during the Depression, when life and happiness were threatened by nature, and the years after World War II, when our Western society began to change from the large, multi-generational home in the country, on the farm, to the rise of the idea that success was measured by independence, from the safety and security offered by the umbrella of the older generation. Well, that was back when I was in college, and I became interested in urban planning and learned a lot about the history of migration from farms to the cities, which was the beginning of the movement that I'm talking about. But the effects were more than industrialization. It drastically affected the social structure of our society. The large farmhouse had been the center of family life back in the day. It was primarily a patriarchal society, but we women folk know it was always the mother who ran the household and controlled the social structure. Today it seems that whoever is the master of the remote control device is who runs the roost. And the kids do that, sadly to say. Well, back to my story. First, the absence of men from the workforce in the 1940s during the war, because they were fighting and out of the country, many of them, and that necessitated women joining the workforce. Rosie the Riveter billboards enticed women to go to work in the factories, especially the munitions factories. But once you let the genie out of the bottle, you cannot put her back. That is the very event that seeded the soon-to-explode feminist movement. Well, that's not what I'm going to explore here, but I'd love to address that in a future video. Here, I'm going to focus on how the war itself expanded the hopes and dreams of the soldiers returning from war. The young man who left the farm to experience war in the trenches of battle came back a different man. He and the generations to come would never be that naive, nose-to-the-grindstone lad that they once were. I can personally relate to a similar feeling I had when I returned from spending 3 months hitchhiking across Europe in the mid-1960s. My perspective of life in the United States changed so dramatically that I could no longer relate to the upward movement on the social ladder that I had been directed at. I saw life from a different perspective, that of community, social interaction, family, and pointed directly the opposite way from materialism, social stature, possessions defining the personal and financial success of an individual. Well, my point here is that experience changes a person, and the person is never the same. So when men came back from the war, they had seen life in big cities, they saw tragedy, they met people from other cultures that gave them a new perspective about their own lives and hopes and dreams. Couple that with the change from the agricultural-based society to the industrial-based society economy, Johnny Come Marching Home moved to the city where land was limited and houses were small. The Song of the Times represent that movement, and here is the song Little Boxes, written by Malvina Reynolds in 1962 when she was 62 years old. And I will leave a biography of her in my description box below because she was quite an amazing woman. So here is the song, and listen carefully to the words. I'll print them on the screen for you.
Little boxes on the hillside, little boxes made of ticky-tacky, little boxes on the hillside, little boxes all the same. There's a pink one and a green one and a blue one and a yellow one, and they're all made out of ticky-tacky and they all look just the same. And the people in the houses all went to the university where they were put in boxes and they came out all the same. And there's doctors and lawyers and business executives, and they're all made out of ticky-tacky and they all look just the same. And they all play on the golf course and drink their martinis dry, and they all have pretty children, and the children go to school, and the children go to summer camp, and then to the university where they are put in boxes and they come out all the same. And the boys go into business and marry and raise a family in boxes boxes made of ticky-tacky, and they all look just the same. There's a pink one, and a green one, and a blue one, and a yellow one, and they're all made out of ticky-tacky, and they all look just the same.
A fledgling effort began in the 1960s to encourage communal living. Yes, I'm talking about the hippie movement. That was when birth control gave women the freedom to go beyond youth and emerge into mainstream society. And yes, I was there, Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco in 1966, where flower children abound. And I was one who burned the bra and wove flowers through my hair. That seems so long ago. I remained in California and finished college there. And during that time that I began an interest in urban planning in my senior year of college. And I helped create the curriculum for a class at Berkeley called Innovative Residential Design for Alternative Lifestyle. Yes, the hippie commune. That was our last-ditch effort to preserve the extended family and multi-generational shared housing. And today I am happy to announce that there's a resurgence of the communal spirit in the movement of intentional communities or eco-communities based on the principles of conservation, alternative energy or energy independence, living off the grid, cooperative and organic farming, and yes, multifamily and multi-generational living. So it looks like we've gone full circle, and that's a good thing. One of the most valuable aspects of multi-generational living is the concept of it takes a village, especially to raise children. Today, with the emergence of single-parent families and mostly female heads of households, the burden of child rearing falls squarely and solely on the mother. And what a tragedy that has turned out to be. No more family dinners where we discuss the day's events or plan for tomorrow. Today we're lucky to sit at the kitchen counter to eat without an iPad drawing our attention away from family discussion. And here I refer to my video titled, Where Has All the Passion Gone? And I'll link that below. It may take a coronal mass ejection or an electromagnetic pulse or a pole shift to shake society to its core and return to community as the only chance of survival. Yes, I could probably just stop here and say it's done, but I want to get back to the survival group and their devaluation of the older or lost generation. As you can see, my white hair and the wisdom in my eyes puts me in that latter group. I'm going to read my reply to the suggestion that older people be excluded from the survival group. It just might change your thoughts about valuing, especially respecting, that generation. And here is my story, and I called it, Those Were the Days. I was born during the middle of World War II. My father was whisked away from home to help clean up Pearl Harbor. He often talked about Schofield Barracks in Honolulu, but he eventually became part of the Fighting 69th Infantry Division and was in the famous Elba River Battle, where the Allied troops met the Russian army, leading to the end of the war. During my father's absence, my mother lived in Greenfield, Iowa, with her grandmother, my great-grandmother, and, of course, her mother. And those who know me are very familiar with my great-grandmother, Evelina Brown. When my dad was discharged from the Army in June of 1945, he retrieved his little family, me, 18 months old, and my 3-year-old sister, and my mother. And we returned to his hometown Messina, Iowa, deep in the Corn Belt in southwestern Iowa, with a population of around 500 people. Of his 6 brothers and sisters, 2 still lived in the small town, along with his mother and his father. What I remember most vividly during that time, and later visiting my cousins after we moved to the big city, Minneapolis, what I remember was the configuration of their house. They had no basement, but they had moved 2 small houses together and attached them between the front room of one house and the dining room of the other house. The dormitory-type bedroom was on the dining room side, with 2 smaller bedrooms and the kitchen on the front room side. On the dining room side of the house was a large closet with an access panel in the ceiling that led to the attic. From the opening, we kids would crawl through the cobwebs and make our way to the space between the 2 houses, where we would play hide and seek and tell stories and fly away to distant lands in our imaginary worlds. But it was the kitchen that most intrigued me. There was a sink and a drain board and a small hand pump from which water could be drawn. On the other side of the room was an ice box with ice in the top section, delivered weekly by a truck that carried the ice, and a small table that held a bucket of clean water, a tin ladle to drink from, an enamel basin, which was a large shallow bowl, and a slop bucket on the floor at the end of the counter. No bottled water, no filters, nothing but water that came out of the ground from a large pump that stood in the front yard. Tin buckets transported the water from that pump to the kitchen. Now, in the front yard was a large stump of a tree where my aunt would place a live chicken, and with a swift swing of a cleaver, she would chop off the head. The chicken would fly off the stump and hobble around the yard for a few minutes before it hit the dust. We children would be tasked with removing the feathers and plucking out the pins. I think that's what the term was. No, there's another word. I can't remember it now. The back of the house had a brick wall between the back kitchen door and the outhouse, which housed 2 holes carved out of a wood platform where one would sit to do their business. However, on cold, snowy nights, we children were allowed to do our business in the slop bucket in the kitchen, which was emptied before dawn by the grown-ups. And as gross as it may seem, I do believe the bucket of slop would be given to the pigs. The outhouse had no seat liners or even toilet paper, but hanging from a nail were square pieces of paper cut out of old Sears catalogs. Beyond the backyard was our playground, my uncle's junkyard. Yes, my uncle was the keeper of the local junkyard, from which precious metals would be gleaned and sold. It was the job of the children to take buckets and scurry the alleys and collect any bits of material of metal that we could find. I remember a jewel to find was a lead jar lid ring used in canning fruit from the plentiful fruit trees beyond the junkyard. We would be tasked also to follow the railroad tracks looking for loose spikes. Speaking of canning, all the jars of canned fruits, as well as gunny sacks filled with potatoes gleaned from the potato patch next to the vegetable garden, were placed in a fruit cellar which was next to the pump in the front yard. Now, if you don't know what a fruit cellar is, let me tell you. From my perspective as a child, it was the scariest place I'd ever been. It was identified by a large mound of dirt covered with grass. At a slight angle following the curvature of the mound was a cellar door, leading down a very steep, creaky stairwell into one small, dark, damp room. The dirt walls of this dungeon were lined with wooden shelves that held last year's crop of canned apples, peaches, beets, and other preserved foods. The cellar was a perfect food storage place because of its constant temperature of around 55 degrees. And how to preserve food by canning, I'll leave that for another time. The fruit cellar served another purpose. It was our sanctuary against a tornado. I'm sure you've seen such sanctuaries in old movies. I invite you to read my short story, Twister of 47, on my website. I'll leave that below. And that vividly describes living through the devastating tornado in that small town in Iowa when I was 3 years old. Well, back to the playground. There were many carcasses of old cars and wooden wagons, fences, all rusting away. It was the perfect place for playing hide and seek. Those long ago days are some of my most treasured memories. The end. Well, here is my postscript to the story. I wrote this to the survival group members, and I quote here. I've taken the time to write this story today because of how important those memories will be when we find ourselves emerging from our caves to a land that we won't recognize. Please search between the lines of the story and extract the survival tips and ways you can prepare and contribute to enhance the survival of our group in the after times that we know lie ahead. End quote. Well, my quest today is to encourage you to teach your kids to respect their grandparents, and if lucky enough, their great-grandparents. The wealth of wisdom gained from their journey may be the very information that will save mankind when the earth changes begin, if they haven't already. There will come a time that you won't have your iPad or your cell phone or the internet for instant communication and information. And we will, in an instant, change from the informative information highway society back to the olden days. Will you know how to survive when that happens? Then you'd better open your door to embrace your mother, your father, your grandmother, or her mother, if you're lucky to have her still around, because they harbor the secrets to your survival. I thank you for watching, and if you get anything at all from this video, please leave your comments below. May God bless you and keep you safe. I am Natasha.